My mother stole my grandmother's house right out from under me while I was deployed overseas. She sold it for $190,000 and spent every last cent on herself and my deadbeat brother. A decade later, when she was broken, and begging to move into that same house, I got to tell her I'd bought it back at foreclosure auction for $85,000, and it was already full of a family who actually deserved it. Before we get into this, drop where you're listening from and your local time in the comments. I read everyone. My name is Sarah, and I'm a 31-year-old woman. I live in a quiet condo just outside Charlotte, North Carolina now, but I grew up in Savannah, Georgia, in a pale yellow Victorian house on East Gordon Street. That house was built in 1897 with a wraparound porch, original heart pine floors, and a magnolia tree in the backyard that was older than the city itself. It belonged to my grandmother, who everyone called Nana. She was the only person in my childhood who made me feel like I was not a mistake. My mother, Deborah, had 2 kids. Derek was 2 years older than me, and he was the son my mother orbited around. Whatever Derek wanted, Derek got. New video games, designer sneakers, a car on his 16th birthday, a Mustang even after he'd already wrecked a used Honda twice. I got his leftovers and a constant reminder that I should be more grateful. Derek could do no wrong. When he dropped out of community college after 1 semester because it was, quote, too stressful, my mother framed it as a brave mental health choice. When I made the honor roll 3 years in a row and got a partial scholarship to Georgia Southern, she didn't come to the ceremony because Derek had a sinus infection and needed her to make soup. The dynamic was set before I could walk. Derek was the golden child. I was the scapegoat, the one who had to earn every scrap of affection and still came up short. I can remember the exact texture of the carpet in my bedroom, a thin beige mat that was always shedding fibers, while Derek's room had new plush gray carpet and a flat-screen TV when we were teenagers. I remember the dinner plates. My mother would serve Derek first, the best cuts of meat, the biggest spoonfuls of mashed potatoes, and then turn to me with a smaller portion and say, "You need to watch your figure, Sarah." I was a size 4. Derek was already pushing 200 pounds in high school, but to her, he was perfect. Once, when I was 11, I brought home a report card with all A's and 1 B+ in math. My mother glanced at it and said, "See, if you applied yourself a little more, you'd have straight A's like Derek could if he wanted to." Derek's grades were C's and D's, but she never commented on his. Instead, she'd tell me to help him with his homework, to be a supportive sister, to make sure he succeeded because he had so much potential. I spent hours at the kitchen table trying to explain algebra to him while he stared at his phone and grunted. If I complained, my mother would snap, "He's just a boy, Sarah. Boys mature slower. You need to be patient." The resentment was like a slow drip, filling a bucket I didn't know I was carrying. There was a day in 7th grade when I won the county spelling bee. I had studied for weeks, memorizing word lists, practicing with Nana over the phone. I came home with a trophy, a small gold cup with my name on a plate, and I was buzzing. My mother was on the couch, watching a reality show about rich housewives. I held up the trophy and she said, "That's nice, honey. Put it on the shelf. Did you remember to pick up Derek's laundry from the dryer?" No hug, no picture, nothing. That same week, Derek got a participation ribbon for a school field day where he sat out half the events because he said his ankle hurt. My mother framed that ribbon. It hung in the hallway for years. I walked past it every morning on my way to the bus stop, a faded yellow ribbon next to Derek's school photos, while my honor roll certificates were shoved in a drawer in the kitchen. It was so small, but it was everything. Another time, when I was 14, I saved up from babysitting for 4 months to buy a pair of running shoes for track. They were $60, gray and pink, and I had to beg my mother for a ride to the store. She drove me but complained the whole time about the gas, about the inconvenience, about how Derek needed new cleats for a baseball season he quit 2 weeks later. When we got to the shoe store, she stood by the door, arms crossed, while I tried them on. I remember the fluorescent lights buzzing, the smell of new rubber, and the way she wouldn't even look at me. I bought the shoes with a stack of crumpled bills and rode home in silence. A week later, I saw Derek wearing new sneakers that cost $120. He'd asked for them the night before, and my mother drove him to the mall, bought them, and took him out for ice cream. I sat in my room and cried, the new running shoes still in the box because I was afraid to wear them, as if using them would make the whole thing more real. School events were the loneliest. In 10th grade, I performed a solo in the spring chorus concert. I had practiced for months, a piece from a musical that Nana loved. The night of the concert, I stood on the risers, the lights hot on my face, and scanned the audience. I saw Nana in the third row, beaming, wearing her good navy dress. 2 seats were empty beside her, the ones I'd saved for my mother and Derek. After the concert, Nana hugged me and said, "You sounded like an angel. I'm so proud of you." I asked where my mother was. Nana's face tightened and she said Derek had a stomach ache and needed her at home. "I'm sorry, sweetheart." I found out later that Derek was fine. They had ordered pizza and watched a movie. My mother didn't even mention the concert the next day, didn't ask how it went. I was invisible in plain sight, but Nana saw me. She lived in that big house alone after my grandfather died, and she would pick me up every Friday after school and drive me to her place. We'd bake oatmeal cookies, watch old black and white movies, and she'd tell me stories about growing up during the Depression. She taught me to value hard work, to stand up for myself, and to never let anyone make me feel small. She also watched my mother pour all her energy into Derek while treating me like an afterthought, and it broke her heart. Nana told me once, when I was 16 and crying in her kitchen because my mother forgot my birthday but threw Derek a party for his 18th that cost over $2,000, she said, "Sarah, some people are born with a hole inside them, and no amount of pouring will ever fill it. Your mother has that hole, and she's decided Derek is the only thing that can plug it. It has nothing to do with you." I held onto those words for years. There were so many times I needed them, like the Christmas when I was 14 and I had saved up from babysitting to buy my mother a real pearl necklace at the mall, something I'd seen her admire in a catalog. I wrapped it in gold paper, and she opened it while Derek ripped into a brand new PlayStation, a leather jacket, a pair of Timberlands. My mother looked at my gift, said, "This is nice, Sarah, but you know I don't wear costume jewelry," and set it aside without even thanking me properly. Later, I saw it in her bathroom trash can. Derek's pile of gifts, though, she photographed and posted on Facebook with a caption about being the luckiest mom in the world. That was the year I realized there was no amount of achievement that would ever make me visible to her. It was always going to be Derek. Nana, when I told her what happened, just held me and said, "You're not invisible to me, and you're not invisible to God. Someday you'll find people who see you, and you'll know exactly what you're worth." I clung to that. There were other moments, smaller but just as sharp. When I was 15, I tried out for the school play, and I got a minor role with a few lines. I was so proud. My mother promised she'd come on opening night. I kept a seat saved for her in the front row. The curtain went up, and I scanned the audience. My mother wasn't there. She'd forgotten because Derek had wanted to go to the movies, and she'd taken him to see some action film. When I got home, I was still in my stage makeup, smeared mascara and all. She said, "Oh, was that tonight? I'm sorry, baby, Derek was having a rough day." No apology that stuck, no attempt to make it right. That happened over and over. My track meets, my debate tournaments, my honor roll ceremonies, all attended by exactly 0 family members. Meanwhile, she drove 4 hours to watch Derek sit on the bench at a junior college baseball game he wasn't even playing in, because he'd been benched for skipping practice. The sign that I ignored, the one that should have warned me, was how she talked about Nana's house. Even before Nana died, my mother would say things like, "That house is going to be a gold mine one day. The neighborhood is finally turning. We need to make sure it stays in the family." She said "we," but she meant herself and Derek. I heard her on the phone with her sister once, my Aunt Carol who lived in Texas, saying, "Mamas will better be fair. I'm the one who visits her. I'm the one who will have to deal with her estate. Sarah's just a kid. She doesn't know anything." I was 17, sitting on the stairs, and I heard every word. I didn't say anything. I was too afraid of her anger, too trained to stay quiet. Looking back, there were signs I ignored, and I look at that girl on the stairs and want to shake her. But she was just a child, starved for love, believing that if she was good enough, her mother would finally see her. That belief would cost me everything. Nana died when I was 18. I was a senior in high school, a week away from graduation. She had been sick for a while, a slow cancer that hollowed her out, but she held on long enough to have her lawyer visit her at the hospital. I remember the day we got the call. I was in class, and my mother didn't come to pick me up. I had to walk 2 miles to the hospital in the heat, my backpack heavy with textbooks. When I got there, Nana was already unconscious, and my mother was in the hallway talking loudly on her cell phone about how much the antique furniture in the house might be worth. She didn't notice me standing there, listening, as she said, "The dining room set alone is probably $5,000, and the china I need to get an appraiser." Derek's going to need a head start in life, and this is it. She hung up, turned, and saw me. Her face flickered just for a second, and then she plastered on a sad smile. Sarah, honey, Nana's not doing well. Let's go in together. I followed her into the room, and I held Nana's dry, papery hand while my mother stood at the foot of the bed, her eyes calculating. The day after the funeral, I sat in that lawyer's office with my mother and Derek and learned that Nana had left the house on East Gordon Street entirely to me. Not to my mother, not split, not in a trust, just me, free and clear. The house was appraised at $185,000 at the time, but really it was priceless. My mother's face went white, then red. She started yelling that there must be a mistake, that she was the daughter, that Derek needed a place to live. The lawyer, a kind older man named Mr. Patterson, just slid the will across the desk and said, "Your mother was very clear about her wishes. She wanted Sarah to have a home that no one could take from her." I remember looking at Derek. He was 20, already balding a little, wearing a polo shirt that strained over his belly, and he just shrugged like the whole thing bored him. That should have been my first warning sign, the casual indifference, the way he didn't even fight for me. But I was 18 and numb with grief. I just cried and held the deed like it was a love letter. My mother screamed at Mr. Patterson for 20 minutes, demanding to see Nana's medical records, claiming she wasn't of sound mind. She said, "My mother was practically senile, everyone knew it. She wouldn't have cut out her own daughter unless someone manipulated her. Were you in the room, Sarah? Did you cry poverty and make her feel sorry for you?" I just shook my head, tears streaming. Mr. Patterson asked her to leave, and she stormed out, dragging Derek behind her. The silence after she left was the first peace I'd felt in weeks. I didn't move into the house right away. I was about to start college, and Nana had always wanted me to get an education. So I went to Georgia Southern, got a degree in business administration, and during those 4 years I kept the house empty. I'd drive back to Savannah every few months, cut the grass, air out the rooms, and sit on the porch feeling her presence. The house had all of Nana's furniture still in it, her china cabinet, her rocking chair, her collection of crystal birds in the bay window. I kept the utilities on, paid the taxes with money from my part-time job as a waitress at a Cracker Barrel, and never let anyone inside except me. My mother hated it. Every time we talked, she'd mention how wasteful it was to let a beautiful house sit there, how Derek and his new girlfriend, Amber, could really use a place, how she could manage it for me, rent it out, something. I always said no. I wasn't ready to let anyone touch that house. It felt sacred, like Nana's arms around me. During those years, my mother's questions got more pointed. She'd call and say, "Sarah, you really should have a will. You own property now, and if something happens to you, it's important your assets stay in the family. I can have my friend draft one for you." Or she'd ask, "Sweetie, is the deed in your name only, or did Nana put it in a trust? I'm just curious for tax purposes." I didn't think much of it. I was busy studying, working, and trying to build a life. I remember one conversation vividly. It was Thanksgiving break, my sophomore year. I was home for the holidays, staying at my mother's apartment. Derek was out, and my mother poured me a glass of wine, which she'd never done before. She sat across from me at the kitchen table and said, "Sarah, I know we've had our differences, but I want to be a better mother. I've been thinking about Nana's house. It's such a big responsibility for you alone. What if we put it in a family trust with me as co-trustee? That way, if something happens to you, Derek and I are protected, and you're protected too. It's just good planning." Her voice was soft, almost tender, and for a moment I wanted to believe her. But something Nana had once said echoed in my head. "Your mother loves Derek like a garden loves rain. You are a weed to her, and she will pluck you out if it makes room for him." I told her I'd think about it, which was my way of saying no without starting a fight. She smiled tightly, and I saw a flicker of frustration in her eyes before she masked it. That flicker was the sign. But I let it go because confrontation with her was exhausting, and I just wanted a peaceful holiday. Looking back, there were signs I ignored, little things my mother said and did that should have set off alarms. She borrowed my spare house key once, claiming she needed to pick up some of Nana's old photo albums, and I later found out she had spent the afternoon measuring rooms and taking pictures of the layout. She talked to a realtor. I learned much later, even then. She was already laying the groundwork. After college, I didn't know what I wanted to do. I had a business degree but no passion for the corporate world. I worked a series of desk jobs that left me feeling hollow. A brief stint in a call center, then a receptionist at a dental office. I watched my mother and Derek continue their strange symbiosis. He was 24 by then, still living at home, working part-time at a car wash, and spending the rest of his time playing video games and smoking weed. Amber had left him for a guy with a real job, and my mother blamed Amber, not Derek's complete lack of ambition. Every time I visited, my mother would say things like, if you sold the house, you could help Derek buy his own place. He needs a fresh start and family helps family. I'd respond, I'm not selling Nana's house, and she'd shake her head like I was the unreasonable one. The pressure was subtle but constant, a drip of guilt that never stopped. I needed to get away to do something that would make me feel strong and independent. So at 22, I enlisted in the Army. I wanted the discipline, the challenge, the chance to see the world and earn money for grad school. Nana would have worried, but she would have understood. My mother, predictably, made it about herself. Why would you do this to me? You're going to get yourself killed and I'll be left with nothing. She didn't mention the house, but she had started calling it the family home in conversations, a phrase she'd never used before. I let it slide because I was exhausted by her. I did my basic training at Fort Jackson, then went to Fort Gordon for advanced individual training. I was assigned to a signal unit, and for a while it was just what I needed. I got in shape, made friends, felt like I was building a life. I still owned the house, and I paid the property taxes and utilities out of my military pay. The house sat empty, but it was mine, a promise of a future. Then in 2015, I got orders to deploy to Afghanistan. It was my first deployment, 9 months in a dusty forward operating base near Kandahar, working comms. I was scared but ready. In the weeks before I shipped out, my mother got unusually helpful. She drove down from Savannah to see me at Fort Gordon, brought me a care package of socks and snacks, and sat with me in the base food court with tears in her eyes. I know we've had our problems, Sarah, but I'm your mother and I love you. I'm so proud of you. The words felt like a foreign language. She had never said she was proud of me before. I was suspicious, but I also wanted to believe. I wanted a mom who loved me. I was about to go to war, and she was telling me she loved me. So I let my guard down. That's when she brought up the power of attorney. She said it very casually, like an afterthought. Sweetie, with you going so far away, you should really have someone stateside who can handle your affairs if something happens. God forbid, if you get hurt and I need to talk to the VA or deal with your bills, it would be a nightmare without the legal paperwork. I'm your closest relative. Why don't you sign a durable power of attorney so I can help if there's an emergency? She made it sound so reasonable, so maternal. I hesitated. I was 24, not a kid, and I knew a POA gave someone a lot of control. But she said it was just for emergencies, just for medical decisions and basic finances. She had a document ready, typed up by a lawyer she said she found online. It was printed on thick paper, with a notary seal already stamped, waiting for my signature. The document named her as my agent, giving her authority to manage my property, my bank accounts, anything in my name. I asked, "Why does this include property?" She laughed and said, "Oh, that's just standard boilerplate. You don't want me to not be able to pay your electric bill while you're gone, do you? If something happens to you, I need to be able to protect your assets, not let the government seize them or something. It's just precautionary, baby." I was tired. I was about to deploy to a war zone. I trusted her because she was my mother, and in that moment, I just wanted to feel like I had a family behind me. I signed. She hugged me, put the document in her purse, and left with a smile I'd never seen before. I would replay that moment 1,000 times in the coming years. I landed at Kandahar Airfield in June 2015. The heat was brutal, the work constant. I was assigned to a small comms team, 12-hour shifts in a tent full of humming equipment, patching calls, maintaining satellite links, always with the murmur of operations in the background. I barely had time to think about home. The first few months, my mother sent emails that were full of love and updates about the neighborhood, saying she was checking on the house, watering Nana's old roses, making sure the pipes didn't freeze. She wrote about how the yard was in full bloom, how the magnolia looked healthier than ever, how she dusted the inside so it wouldn't feel abandoned. I felt a warmth I hadn't felt in years. Maybe I had been wrong about her. Maybe Derek had been the wedge, and now that I was far away, she could love me properly. I wrote back, thanking her for taking care of things. I didn't know she was already gutting me. In September, I got a cryptic message from a friend back in Savannah, a girl I'd gone to high school with named Jenna. She sent it over Facebook, a short note that said, "Hey, I saw a sold sign on your grandma's house. Did you decide to sell?" My stomach dropped. I stared at that screen for a full minute, my heart pounding so loud I could hear it over the drone of the generators. I immediately emailed my mother, asking what was going on. She replied within a day, breezy and unconcerned. "Oh, honey, the market is so hot right now. I talked to a realtor and he said we could get almost 200,000. I thought it would be better to sell and invest the money for you. Don't worry, I'll handle everything. You just focus on your mission. I'll have a nice nest egg waiting for you when you come home." I was furious and panicked. I called her from the base phone, a scratchy connection that cut in and out. The phone was a gray brick on the wall, and the line crackled with static, and my voice echoed back to me with a half-second delay. I screamed that she had no right to sell my house, that I never agreed to that I was coming home in 6 months and wanted my house. She stayed calm, that sickening sweet voice. "Sarah, you're not thinking clearly. You're in a war zone. What if something happens and you never come back? This is a smart financial move. It's what Nana would have wanted, her legacy growing for you. I'm your mother, you gave me the power of attorney, you need to trust me." I shouted that I was revoking the POA. She said, "You can't from over there, not easily. And by the time you do, the sale will be done. Just let me do this for you." She hung up. I stood there, the receiver pressed to my ear, listening to the dead air. I called the base legal office, but they said it was a civil matter, that I'd need to get a lawyer stateside, that it could take months. I was stuck on the other side of the world, fighting a war, and my mother was selling my soul. The sale closed in October 2015. The house sold for $190,000. By the time I found out the exact number, it was already too late. The money went into an account that my mother controlled under the POA, and from there, it vanished. She paid off her own credit card debt, which I later learned was over $40,000 racked up on home shopping networks and casino trips. She bought Derek a brand new Jeep Wrangler, a bright red one with a hard top and a sound system, and booked a Caribbean cruise for them both. She posted photos of the cruise on Facebook, tagged me in them with captions like, "Wish you were here, sweetie. So proud of our soldier." In one photo, she's holding a cocktail with a little umbrella, her face sunburned, Derek beside her with a thumbs up, the blue ocean behind them. I saw those photos on a dusty laptop in the middle of the night, while mortar shells occasionally rumbled in the distance. I felt a betrayal so pure it was like a physical wound. I cried until I couldn't breathe. Then I got back to work because I had no choice. That was my first taste of the injustice that would define the next decade. The next 6 months were a blur of missions and a growing, festering anger. I emailed my mother demanding she put the money in a separate account for me. She sent a one-line reply. "You need to learn to be less materialistic. This is for the family." She never mentioned the house again. I forwarded the whole email chain to the lawyer I'd managed to contact in Savannah, MS. Okonkwo, along with the POA and the sale documents. She told me over a crackling satellite call that I could file a lawsuit for breach of fiduciary duty, but given my location, it would be almost impossible to start within any reasonable time frame. And even if I won, collecting would be a nightmare since my mother had likely spent the money on non-exempt items. The best she could do was send a cease and desist for the remaining funds, but she doubted there were any. I hung up feeling hollowed out, like a pumpkin with the inside scraped clean. When I finally returned stateside in March 2016, I took 2 weeks of leave and drove straight to Savannah. I didn't call her in advance. I pulled up to East Gordon Street and parked across from Nana's house. The magnolia was still there, but the porch had been painted a garish white, and a cheap plastic swing set sat in the side yard. A young couple was sitting on the steps, drinking iced tea. They looked happy. I just sat in my car and wept. That was my house, my anchor, the only thing Nana had left me, and it was gone. I confronted my mother at her apartment, a 2-bedroom place in a newer complex that Derek had moved out of by then because she'd bought him a small condo with part of the money. I still remember the dialogue like it's burned into my brain. I walked in without knocking, and she was on the sofa watching TV, a glass of white wine in her hand. The apartment smelled like air freshener over something sour. She looked up, startled but not guilty. "Sarah, you're back, you could have called. You sold my house." She sighed, set down the wine, and gestured for me to sit. I didn't move. "I did what was best for you," she said. "You were never going to live there, you're in the army. You could be stationed anywhere for years. A house sitting empty is a burden. I turned it into cash you can use. Where is it? Where's the money?" She looked away at the TV, which was muted but showing some home renovation show. I used some of it to help Derek get on his feet. You know he's been struggling, and I had some debts. The rest is in an investment account that's not liquid right now. I'll give you the details when it matures." I knew she was lying. I demanded statements, account numbers. She got defensive, then angry. "You are so ungrateful. I gave birth to you. I raised you. You think you're owed that house because some old woman wrote you a piece of paper." Nana was senile at the end. She didn't know what she was doing. That house should have come to me, and I made it right. I turned it into resources for this family, and you're standing there like a spoiled brat. Her voice rose to a shriek. "What do you need a house for anyway? You're a soldier. You live in barracks. You probably won't even be alive in 10 years. That last sentence hit me like a slap. I just turned around and walked out. I could hear her still yelling, but I didn't stop until I was in my car, my hands gripping the steering wheel so hard my knuckles were white. I drove to a park, Forsyth Park, and sat on a bench near the fountain. The water sprayed a fine mist, and the moss in the trees hung like silent grief. I realized that I had no home, no savings, and a mother who genuinely did not care if I lived or died. I was 24 years old, and I was completely alone. The rock bottom didn't happen all at once. It was a slow, grinding descent that took years. First, I tried to fight legally. I contacted MS, Okonkwo, who had all the documents I'd sent from Afghanistan. She was a tall woman with silver braids and a voice that never wasted a syllable. Her office was in a brick building downtown, with a mahogany desk and law books lining the walls. I sat in that same office where Mr. Patterson had handed me the deed, and she laid it out. She said the POA I signed was a durable general power of attorney with a property clause that gave my mother broad authority. The sale of the house was devastating, but technically within the legal bounds of the document. I could sue for fraud, undue influence, and breach of fiduciary duty. But to win, I'd have to prove she intentionally deceived me about the scope of the POA, and that she used the money for personal gain in violation of her duty to me. Even if I won, a judgment would be a piece of paper. She had no assets in her name because the condo was in a trust she'd set up for Derek, and her bank accounts were near zero. "Your mother is what we call judgment-proof," MS, Okonkwo said. "She's a pro at disappearing assets. I've seen it before, especially with family POAs. It'll cost you $30,000 to $40,000 in legal fees that you don't have, and you'll end up with a piece of paper and even more bitterness. My advice, as hard as it is to walk away and rebuild. Don't let her take your future, too." I paid her the consultation fee, which was $300, out of my dwindling savings, and left the office with a weight like lead in my stomach. I remember walking through Forsyth Park again, the same fountain, the same bench, and just sitting there as the sun went down. I thought about how I had let the very thing Nana warned me about happen. I had handed my mother the key, and she had burned down my inheritance without a second thought. I returned to active duty, but I was no longer the same soldier. I was distracted, angry, and depressed. I couldn't sleep. I'd lie in my bunk and replay the signing of the POA in my head, every moment, every syllable. I'd think about my mother's face as she handed me the pen. I'd think about the cruise photos, the Jeep, the condo. The anger corroded me. My performance suffered. I made mistakes on reports. I was short with my commanding officer. I started showing up late to formations. One day, my sergeant pulled me aside and asked what was going on. I couldn't tell him. I just said I had family problems. He told me to get it together or I'd be facing administrative action. I tried, but the bitterness was a fog I couldn't shake. Eventually, I got a letter of reprimand for insubordination after I spoke sharply to a lieutenant during a briefing. I was told my contract wouldn't be renewed after my term. I served out the rest of my days quietly, going through the motions, and in early 2018, I was honorably discharged with nothing to show for it but a few $1,000s in the bank and a deep, festering wound. For the next 2 years, I lived in a series of miserable situations. I moved to Atlanta because I couldn't stand to be in Savannah, couldn't drive past that house. I rented a room in a house with 4 other people, a place in a rough neighborhood off Bankhead Highway. The house was a faded blue split level with a sagging porch and a constant smell of mildew. My room was barely big enough for a twin bed and a dresser. The walls were thin, and I could hear my roommates arguing, playing music, or watching TV at all hours. One of them, a guy named Travis, was a heavy drinker who would stumble in at 3 a.m. and pass out on the living room floor, sometimes vomiting on the rug. Another, a woman named Gina, sold clothes online, and had piles of plastic bags stacked in the hallway, so many that you had to turn sideways to pass. I worked at a call center during the day, answering phones for a health insurance company, listening to people scream at me about denied claims for 8 hours straight. The cubicle was gray, the headset was greasy, and the fluorescent lights gave me headaches. The pay was $12 an hour, and after taxes, it barely covered rent, which was $500 a month for my share of the rotting house. At night, I worked at a diner called the Owl's Nest, a greasy spoon on Ponce de Leon Avenue, where I scrubbed grills and mopped floors until 2 a.m., for tips and minimum wage. The diner had a black and white checkered floor that never came fully clean, and a fryer that splattered hot oil on my arms. I'd walk home in the dark, through streets where streetlights were often broken, and collapse into bed, only to wake up at 6 a.m. and do it again. The call center job was soul-crushing in ways I can still feel. We had cubicles with fabric walls that were stained with coffee and years of other people's misery. The headset was a heavy black thing with a microphone that always smelled faintly of mouthwash from the last person. My supervisor was a woman named Trish who had a sing-song voice and a poster on her wall that said, "Hang in there," with a kitten on a branch. She'd walk behind us, monitoring our call times, and tap her watch if we spent too long on a call. The scripts were generic. "I understand your frustration. I'll escalate your case to a specialist." But the calls were nonstop. People with cancer, with sick kids, with denied claims for essential medication. I'd listen to a mother cry because her son's insulin wasn't covered, and I'd have to say, "I'm sorry, there's nothing I can do." I'd transfer the call, and another would click in, a man screaming about a bill he couldn't pay. I'd disconnect, and the next light would blink on my console, a relentless queuing machine. I'd eat my lunch at my desk, a peanut butter sandwich because I couldn't afford the cafeteria. Some days I'd just cry in the bathroom between calls, the fluorescent light buzzing, the smell of industrial cleaner burning my nose. Then I'd go back to the phone and do it again. The diner wasn't better, but it was different. The Owl's Nest had been there since the 1970s, a narrow building with a neon sign that buzzed and flickered. The regulars were truck drivers, night shift workers, and a few people who just seemed lost. I was a dishwasher and busgirl, minimum wage plus tips that sometimes amounted to $5 a night. The dish pit was a stainless steel nightmare with a sprayer that leaked and a floor that was always slick with grease. The fry cook, a guy named Darnell, was the only kindness there. He'd slip me a burger at closing, wrapped in foil, and say, "You need to eat, girl. You're disappearing." I'd take it home and eat it in my room, the only meal I could count on. My hands were cracked and bleeding from the dish soap, my nails split and raw, and my back ached from bending over sinks. I'd listen to the diner's jukebox play sad country songs while I mopped, and I'd think about Nana, about the porch on East Gordon Street, about the magnolia. Some nights I'd sob while I mopped, the sound lost in the clatter of plates. Living in that house was its own kind of trauma. Travis threw parties on weeknights, loud music and shouting, and I'd lie in my bed with earplugs that didn't work. He once broke the bathroom door off its hinges in a drunken rage, and the landlord never fixed it, so we just had a towel hanging there for privacy. Gina's bags of clothes attracted mice, and I'd hear them scratching in the walls at night. The kitchen sink was always full of dishes, the refrigerator smelled like something died. I'd try to clean, but it was like shoveling snow in a blizzard. I kept a box of my most important things under my bed. Nana's pearl earrings, my military discharge papers, a photo of her on the porch, the deed to the house. It was all I had left of my old life. I'd look at that deed some nights, the yellowed paper, and trace the letters of my name. It was like holding a ghost. My body wore down. I lost weight I couldn't afford to lose. My skin got sallow. I'd catch my reflection in the diner's chrome toaster and barely recognize myself. The woman in the reflection had dark circles under her eyes, sunken cheeks, and a look of permanent exhaustion. I'd run into the bathroom, lock the sticky door, and cry for 5 minutes, then go back out and bus tables. The only thing that kept me going was a stubborn refusal to let her win completely. But even that was fragile. My phone would light up occasionally, with Facebook notifications. My mother and Derek were living their best lives. Derek had a new girlfriend, a tan, expensive clothes. He posted photos of himself on a boat, holding up a fish, the caption reading, "Living the Dream." My mother was posting about her retirement, even though she had never held a steady job. They went to Cancun. They threw a Super Bowl party with a catered spread. My mother posted a photo of herself in a new Lexus, a lease she bragged about, and one of Derek walking into a strip club with a wad of cash. I was scrubbing grease off a grill at 2 a.m. and wondering how I had fallen so far. I'd look at those pictures on my cracked phone screen, my hands raw from the dish soap, and feel a rage that made my hands shake. Then I'd turn off the phone and get back to work, because what else was there? Worse than the poverty was the loneliness. I had no family to lean on. My army friends drifted away after my discharge, each into their own lives, their own struggles. I had a brief relationship with a woman named Keisha, a kind social worker I met at the diner. She came in late one night after a shift at the hospital, ordered a cup of coffee and a slice of pie, and we started talking. She was the first person in months who looked at me like I was a human being. She had a warm smile, a gap between her front teeth, and she asked me about the faint military tattoo on my forearm, a small compass I'd gotten after basic training. We dated for 4 months. She was patient with my baggage and tried to help me see a path forward. She'd have me over to her apartment for dinner, let me do laundry, even gave me a key. She'd say, "Sarah, you've been through hell, but you're still standing. You can't let that woman live in your head rent-free. You need to find something to build toward." I tried, but I was so trapped in my bitterness that I pushed her away. One night, after I'd had too much to drink at her place, a cheap bottle of rosé from a corner store, I ranted about my mother for an hour. I recited every detail, every grievance. I called my mother a monster and Derek a parasite, and when Keisha tried to comfort me, I snapped at her. "You don't get it. You had a normal family. You don't know what it's like to have the person who's supposed to protect you gut you like a fish." She tried to calm me down, but I kept going, my voice rising, and finally she just looked at me with this sad, exhausted expression. She said, "Sarah, you have to let it go or it's going to destroy you. I can't be the only thing holding you together. I love you, but I can't drown with you." I told her she didn't understand, and she left the room. A week later, she broke up with me, kindly but firmly. We sat on her couch, and she held my hand and said, "You are a good person, but you're carrying a weight that you haven't set down, and until you do, you're going to keep sinking. I hope you find your way." I nodded, mute, and walked out. I spent the next 3 months in a deeper hole, barely leaving my room at the Blue House, missing shifts at the call center, and eventually getting evicted. I had no lease, no protection. I just came home one day to find my stuff in garbage bags on the porch. A note from the landlord said, "Rent not paid. Sorry." My clothes, my few books, my military discharge papers, all stuffed into black plastic bags that had been sitting in the sun. I couch surfed for a while, staying on a coworker's fold-out couch for 2 weeks, then at a guy's apartment who I knew from the diner. His name was Mike, and he was nice until his girlfriend got sick of me and gave him an ultimatum. I came back one evening to find my bag outside the door. I ended up in a homeless shelter for women in downtown Atlanta, a place called Grace House, and I stayed there for 3 weeks. The shelter was a converted warehouse with rows of cots in a big open room, a communal bathroom with no locks, and a strict 7 p.m. curfew. The women there were from all walks of life, some with jobs, some with addictions, all with stories. I didn't talk much. I just slept on my cot, ate the thin soup they served, and stared at the ceiling. That was the true bottom. I was 27, with a business degree, military service, and a grandmother who gave me a house, and I was sleeping on a cot in a room full of strangers, all because my mother saw me as a piggy bank. I remember one night, lying there, listening to a woman 2 cots over cry quietly into her pillow, a thin sound like a wounded animal, and I thought, this is it. This is where the story ends. But then something happened. During those weeks in the shelter, they had a small room with 2 ancient computers that residents could use for 30 minutes at a time. I started going there every day, right when the room opened at 9 a.m., and I obsessively searched property records online. I had memorized the address of Nana's house, 410 East Gordon Street, and I checked the Chatham County property records every single day. The computer was slow, the monitor a boxy CRT, and every click took ages to load. But I was patient. I found that the couple who bought Nana's house, the ones I'd seen on the porch, had taken out a large mortgage and then a second one. They had overextended themselves. Then, in 2019, I saw a notice of default. The house was underwater and the bank had started foreclosure proceedings. I stared at that screen for a long time, my heart pounding. The pixels of the scan document were blurry, but I read it 3 times. I felt something I hadn't felt in years, a tiny flicker of hope, like a candle in a hurricane. If that house was going to be sold at auction, maybe, just maybe, I could find a way to buy it back. But I had nothing, not $1 to my name and terrible credit. It seemed impossible. Still, that flicker was enough to get me out of the shelter and applying for every assistance program I could find. The turning point came in the form of a 73-year-old woman named Mrs. Beatrice Harrington. She was a retired school teacher who lived in a small bungalow near the shelter, and she volunteered there 3 days a week, serving meals. She had the kind of face that had laughed a lot and a voice that sounded like honey and gravel. She always wore bright scarves and mismatched earrings, and she called everyone baby. One evening, she saw me sitting alone at a table, staring at a printout of the foreclosure notice I'd been carrying around like a talisman. The paper was creased and worn from being folded and unfolded 100 times. She sat down beside me, set a cup of hot tea in front of me, and said, "You've been looking at that paper for a week now. Want to talk about it?" I didn't know her, but something about her kindness cracked me open. I told her everything, the whole ugly story. She listened without interrupting, her brow furrowed, her hands folded on the table. The shelter's dining room was loud around us, clattering trays and conversations, but she never looked away from me. When I finished, she took my hand. Her grip was warm and strong. "That house is calling you back," she said, "and I think you're going to answer." Mrs. Harrington didn't just offer sympathy, she offered guidance. She had lost her own home to a predatory lender in the 2008 crash, a little craftsman bungalow in East Point that she'd raised her sons in. She told me about the day the bank locked her out, the men in suits changing the locks while she stood on the lawn holding a box of photo albums. She had rebuilt her life from nothing, working as a substitute teacher and a tutor until she could retire with a tiny pension. She understood the real estate system better than anyone I'd met. She helped me get into a transitional housing program, then a Section 8 voucher. She pushed me to use my GI Bill to go back to school for a certification in project management. I enrolled at Georgia State, taking night classes while I worked part-time at a Home Depot during the day. The Home Depot job started at $14 an hour in the paint department, mixing gallons of eggshell and semi-gloss for contractors and dyers. It was steady work, and I was promoted to a department supervisor after 6 months because I showed up on time and worked hard. I saved every penny I could, opening a separate savings account with a local credit union that I never touched, not even for a coffee. Mrs. Harrington would have me over for dinner every Sunday at her bungalow. She'd make fried chicken, collard greens, and cornbread, and we'd sit at her kitchen table, a yellow formica thing with chrome edging, and plot. She taught me how to research tax liens, how to track foreclosure auctions on the county website, how to calculate renovation costs per square foot using old construction manuals she had from her husband. She gave me a notebook, a green spiral-bound thing, and told me to write down every step. Every Sunday, we'd review my progress. I'd show her my bank statements, and she'd nod and say, "You're getting there, baby. Slow and steady wins the race." She became the grandmother I'd lost, without ever trying to replace Nana. She was just a fiercely good human. The rebuild took 3 years. I got my project management certification, and with that, I landed a job as a project coordinator for a construction firm in Savannah. The job paid $52,000 a year, and I moved back to my hometown, renting a tiny studio apartment in Yamacraw Village, a few miles from the house that still sat empty, waiting for auction. The apartment was only 350 square feet, with a kitchenette, a futon, and a window that looked out onto a parking lot. The building had a faint smell of cooking grease and someone else's laundry, but it was mine. I worked 60-hour weeks at the firm, managing subcontractors, budgets, and timelines for commercial builds. The work was hard, but I was good at it. I learned how to read blueprints, how to negotiate with suppliers, how to spot when a contractor was cutting corners. I took on side jobs managing rental properties for a small investor, doing the books, coordinating repairs, and the extra income went straight into the house fund. I also tracked the foreclosure process obsessively. The couple who bought the house had abandoned it. The bank had winterized it, but vandals had broken in. I drove by the house every Sunday after my shift. I'd park across the street and just look at it. The porch was sagging. The magnolia was half dead with brown, curled leaves. Some of the windows were boarded up with plywood. It looked like a ghost of itself, but it was still standing. I took photos of it every week, documenting the decline, the way the paint peeled in long strips, the way a shutter fell and lay in the tall grass for months. I held onto those photos. They kept me angry, but in a productive way, a way that fueled my discipline rather than my despair. Mrs. Harrington continued to be my rock. We still had Sunday dinners, now at my little studio because she liked a change of scenery. She'd bring a casserole, a chicken divan her mother had taught her, and we'd sit on my futon, eating off paper plates, and go over the numbers. The foreclosure auction had been delayed multiple times because of a messy title dispute and the pandemic backlog. There were 3 continuances posted on the county website, each one sending me into a spiral of anxiety and impatience. But in early 2022, the county scheduled it for January 2023. By then, I had saved $50,000 in my own account. I had perfect credit because I paid my bills on time and kept my credit cards low. I had a single credit card with a $1,000 limit that I paid off every month. My car was an old Honda Civic with 180,000 miles on it, and I drove it gently to avoid repairs. Mrs. Harrington, who had no children living nearby and no grandchildren, told me one day that she wanted to help me buy the house. We were sitting on my futon, and she set down her fork and looked at me with those clear, steady eyes. "I've got a modest savings account," she said. "Money I've been hoarding for decades, ever since I got back on my feet. I want to give you a loan of $40,000 at 0 interest to add to your own savings. You need a competitive bid, and you need to show you're serious." I wept and said it was too much. She reached over and patted my knee. "Girl, I'm old. I can't take it with me, and I'd rather see you get that house back than let some flipper paint it gray and sell it for profit. Nana would want this." I hugged her so tight I thought I'd break her. I wrote up a simple promissory note on a piece of notebook paper, promising to pay her back $40,000 over 10 years, and we both signed it. She folded it carefully and put it in her purse like it was a receipt. That woman was my angel. By late 2022, I had $90,000 in the bank, between my savings and the loan. I kept it in a high-yield savings account, watching the interest tick up by a few dollars each month. The auction was set for a Wednesday morning in January 2023, on the courthouse steps. The day before, I couldn't sleep. I lay in my bed, the futon creaking with every turn, and ran every possible scenario through my head. What if a developer with deep pockets showed up? What if I froze and couldn't bid? What if I won and the house was beyond repair? At 4 a.m., I gave up on sleep and made coffee, then dressed in my good green coat, the one I'd bought at a thrift store but which looked almost new. I wore Nana's old pearl earrings for luck, small and understated, the only jewelry of hers I'd managed to keep because I'd had them in my purse when my world fell apart. I stood in the cold January drizzle, a fine mist that soaked through wool, with a cashier's check for $90,000 folded in the inner pocket of my coat. There were 4 other bidders, all investors, all with clipboards and bored expressions. One of them was chewing a toothpick. The auctioneer was a short man in a yellow raincoat who read the terms fast and flat, his voice a monotone chant. When the bidding started at $50,000, I waited. It crept up $60,000, $65,000. At $80,000, the others started dropping out, shaking their heads and stepping back into the crowd that had gathered to watch. One man with a sour expression and a Bluetooth earpiece kept nodding. We went back and forth. $81,000, $82,000. I bid $85,000, and he shook his head, muttering something about margins, and walked away. The auctioneer said, "Sold to the lady in the green coat." I own Nana's house again. I walked away clutching that cashier's check to my chest, my hands shaking, my heart pounding. I went around the corner to a small alley, leaned against a brick wall that was cold and gritty, and cried. Then I called Mrs. Harrington. She screamed with joy, a sound that echoed through the phone and made me laugh for the first time in years. I could hear her clapping her hands on the other end. I walked the 6 blocks to East Gordon Street. The sidewalks were wet, and the neighborhood was quiet, the old oaks dripping with gray moss. I unlocked the door that still had the same brass keyhole, the key turning with a click I'd remembered in my bones. I stepped inside. The house was a wreck. The heart pine floors were stained and scratched, some boards missing entirely, revealing the subfloor beneath. There was a hole in the living room ceiling where a leak had rotted the plaster, and a pile of sodden drywall lay in the corner. The smell of mildew and neglect was thick, a sour, fungal odor that caught in my throat. The kitchen cabinets were hanging off their hinges, and someone had spray-painted a tag, a gang symbol in neon green, on the dining room wall. The downstairs bathroom had a toilet filled with black sludge, but the bones were there. The curved staircase, though missing the banister, still rose to the second floor with its original newel post. The fireplace mantel where Nana's old clock used to tick was still solid, though covered in dust and soot. The window seat in the upstairs landing, where I used to read Nancy Drew books on rainy afternoons, was water-damaged but not rotted. The clawfoot bathtub was intact, though filled with dead leaves and a bird's nest. I sat on the dusty floor of the living room, right where the magnolia tree's shadow fell through a broken window, and cried again. I had done the impossible. The renovation took almost a year. It wasn't just a remodel, it was a resurrection. I hired a general contractor named Marcus, a guy I knew from my job who was honest and fair. He had a quiet crew of 3, and they started with the structural issues: the roof, the foundation, the termite damage in the back wall. I acted as my own project manager, overseeing the work, making decisions, and doing a lot of the labor myself after hours. I stripped the paint off the original woodwork with a heat gun and chemical stripper, working in a respirator, the fumes sharp in my nostrils. I pulled up the damaged floorboards and sourced replacements from an architectural salvage yard an hour away, matching the grain as closely as I could. Each board had to be planed and sanded by hand. I worked nights and weekends, my hands raw and blistered, covered in dust and sweat, my muscles aching, but every day I saw progress. Mrs. Harrington came by often, bringing sweet tea in a thermos, bossing the workers around in her gentle way. She'd walk through the rooms and say, "Nana's spirit is here. I can feel her smiling." She'd point to a spot and say, "That corner needs a little more love." And Marcus would just nod and smile, because he knew better than to argue with a retired school teacher with that much authority. I replaced the roof with a standing seam metal roof that would last 50 years, a deep green that blended with the trees. I rewired the whole house with the help of a licensed electrician I hired, pulling old knob-end tube wiring out of the walls and replacing it with modern Romex. I updated the plumbing, replacing the galvanized pipes with PEX, and put in a new HVAC system, the ductwork snaking through the crawl space. The porch, which was sagging like an old hammock, I had jacked up and reinforced with pressure-treated beams, and I rebuilt the railing to match the original Victorian pattern, spindles I ordered from a millwork shop that specialized in historical reproductions. The magnolia I nursed back to health by hiring an arborist, a young woman with a PhD in tree biology who injected nutrients into the soil and pruned the dead branches. She told me the tree was stressed but not dying, and with care it would bloom again. By spring, it was covered in buds, and the white blossoms opened like giant stars, their perfume drifting through the open windows. I planted Nana's old rose varieties, which I tracked down through a local nursery that had kept the heritage stock: Mr. Lincoln Reds, Peace Yellows, Queen Elizabeth Pinks. I dug the holes myself, added bone meal to the soil, and watered them every evening. The garden came alive. By September 2023, the house was beautiful again. The floors gleamed a warm honey color, each board polished to a satin sheen. The bay window held my Nana's crystal birds, which I had stored in a small storage unit all these years, a 5x5 space I'd paid $40 a month for, even during the homeless days, because I couldn't let them go. The kitchen had white subway tile and butcher block counters from IKEA, affordable but clean. The whole house smelled of lemon oil and fresh paint, a smell that made me think of Nana's Sunday cleaning rituals. But I didn't move in. I had a plan, one that had grown slowly like the magnolia. I was going to rent the house to a family that needed it, a family that would fill it with laughter and stability, exactly what Nana had wanted for me. That was my quiet victory, not hoarding it for myself, but using it to heal a small part of the world. I found the Ramirez family through a local church, St. James AME. Maria and Hector Ramirez had 3 young kids, ages 4, 6, and 8, and had lost their home in a house fire the previous year. The fire had started in the kitchen while they were sleeping, a faulty outlet. They escaped with their lives and nothing else, the kids barefoot in the street. They had been living in a cramped motel room on the outskirts of town, their insurance money slow to come, their savings depleted by the cost of the motel and eating out. Maria worked as a home health aide, riding buses to clients' homes, and Hector was a mechanic at a tire shop. They were hardworking, kind people, always at church, always helping others. When I showed them the house, Maria cried. She walked through the rooms, touching the walls, whispering in Spanish. Hector shook my hand so many times I thought he'd sprain it. I rented them the house for well below market rate, just enough to cover taxes and insurance. $800 a month when I could have charged $200. I drew up a lease myself, one that gave them stability and protections, a right of first refusal to buy, a long-term renewal option. They moved in the first week of October 2023. I helped them carry boxes, and I got to see the kids run through the hallway, their laughter echoing off the heart pine floors. The youngest, a little girl named Lucia, found the crystal birds in the bay window and said, "Look, Mama, magic birds." The sound of children playing under the magnolia tree, a sound Nana had always wanted, filled that yard. I had found my peace. Now, here's where the story takes its final turn. You've heard about the setup, the betrayal, the rock bottom, the climb back. But the family always comes back when they need something. That's the part you've been waiting for. In January 2024, I got a phone call from a number I didn't recognize. The area code was Savannah. I almost let it go to voicemail, but something made me pick up. It was my brother, Derek. His voice was hoarse, older, stripped of the smugness I remembered. "Sarah, it's Derek. Don't hang up. Mama had a stroke. She's in Memorial Hospital, the one on Reynolds. She's asking for you. She's been asking for 2 days." I felt a lurch of something, not exactly sympathy, but the reflex of a child who still wishes her mother loved her. I told him I'd come, but I didn't say when. I didn't promise anything. I sat with the phone in my hand for a long time, then I drove to the hospital that afternoon, my hands steady on the wheel. The parking garage smelled of disinfectant and anxiety, a chemical lemon scent that clung to my clothes. I followed the signs to the stroke unit, a hallway with pale green walls and the low hum of monitors. I found the room, a shared room with 2 beds, the other one empty. My mother was propped up on pillows, the left side of her face drooping, her mouth pulling down on one side, her left arm limp at her side. A monitor beeped, tracking her heart. She looked smaller, older, the color drained from her skin. Her hair, which she'd always dyed a brassy blonde, was gray at the roots. Derek was there too, in a plastic chair by the window, wearing a stained hoodie and worn jeans, his eyes puffy. He looked 10 years older than he should, his skin sallow, his hair greasy and thinning to a wispy comb-over. He had a twitch in his leg, bouncing his knee constantly. The room felt heavy with failure. I learned over the next hour, through my mother's halting words and Derek's muttered explanations, that they had blown through the house many years ago. Derek had made a series of bad investments, a car wash that failed within 6 months, a gambling habit he developed at the riverboat casinos, and then he got into pills. Oxycodone, then whatever he could find on the street when the prescriptions ran out. He lost his condo to foreclosure, the same condo my mother had bought him with my inheritance. My mother had cashed out any retirement account she had to support him, drained a small annuity Nana had left her, sold her jewelry, her furniture. They had been living in a rundown apartment on the south side, a 1-bedroom in a complex called Magnolia Court that reeked of trash and despair, the ceiling stained with old leaks, the neighbors loud. The stroke had hit my mother while she was making ramen on the stove. She had been alone. Derek was out. She wasn't sure where. She collapsed and lay there on the linoleum floor for an unknown amount of time, maybe 6 hours, before a neighbor heard her moaning through the thin wall and called 911. The stroke left her with significant cognitive impairment and partial paralysis. Her speech was slurred, her memory patchy. She would need long-term care, physical therapy, occupational therapy, a speech therapist, and a safe place to live. And they had nothing. No savings, no insurance, no home. Derek's unemployment had run out 6 months ago, and my mother's Social Security disability application was still pending, lost in a backlog. They were, in the grimmest sense, destitute. Then my mother turned her watery eyes on me and with great effort said, "Sarah, honey, I know I wasn't always the best mother, but I'm your mama. I need you. That old house, your Nana's place, it's still there, isn't it? I heard it went empty after that couple lost it. Maybe you can buy it back, or I can just stay there since it's family. Please, I have nowhere else." Her voice was so thin, so pathetic. The words came out in a slurred rhythm, her tongue thick and uncooperative. The manipulation was still there, wrapped in desperation, the same old song with a new, tragic melody. I stood there, looking at her. She had no idea I already owned it. She had no idea it was full of life. Derek chimed in, scratching his arm, the skin raw and picked at. Yes, Sarah, I looked it up. The house went through a foreclosure auction a while back. Some investor probably got it, but we can make an offer, maybe get a deal. You could help us out for once. I know you got a job now. I've seen your LinkedIn. You're some kind of project manager. You got money. You owe us. The entitlement after everything was breathtaking. I felt not anger, but a deep, calm certainty. This was the moment I had unknowingly been preparing for during all those years of struggle. I pulled a chair up beside the bed, the vinyl seat cold, and sat down. I spoke very quietly, my voice low and steady. The room felt very still, the beeping monitor a distant metronome. Mama, I'm going to tell you something about that house. You remember you sold it from under me while I was in Afghanistan. You took $190,000 and spent it on cruises and jeeps and Derek's failed dreams. You left me with nothing. I was homeless. I was in a shelter, but I didn't give up. I saved, I worked, and a year ago, I stood on the courthouse steps and bought that house back at a foreclosure auction. I paid $85,000. I put my own sweat and tears into every floorboard and every rosebush. And today, that house is not empty. It is occupied by a family, the Rameyerses. They lost their own home in a fire. They have 3 small children who play under Nana's magnolia tree. They are good, hard-working people who needed that safe place, and they are filling it with the love that you drained out of my life. I will not uproot them. I will not let you live there, not for one night, not ever. That house is no longer about you or me, it's about them, and they deserve it. Silence. My mother's face crumpled, and she began to cry in that weak, lopsided way stroke patients do. A tear slid down the right side of her face, the left side frozen. Derek's mouth hung open. His legs stopped bouncing. He sputtered, You bought it. You could rent it to us. You could sell it and give us the money. You can't just leave us on the street. What about family? His voice cracked with rage and something like panic. He stood up, the chair scraping the linoleum. I stood up too, my knees steady. I absolutely can. You made your choices, every single one of them. I am not responsible for the natural consequences of those choices. I looked at my mother. I don't wish you ill. I hope the social workers can find you a bed in a nursing facility that Medicaid will cover. But I am not your safety net. I am not your retirement plan. I am the person you discarded, and I am walking away now. My mother managed to force out 3 words between sobs. You're heartless, Sarah. I paused at the door, my hand on the cold metal push bar. I looked back at her, this woman who had given birth to me and then spent my entire life devaluing me. No, Mama, I just don't have a heart big enough to absorb your cruelty anymore. I gave it back to myself and to people who actually value it. Then I walked out, and the sound of Derek yelling, calling me a coward and worse, faded behind the hospital's automatic doors. The cold January air hit my face, smelling of exhaust and the river, and I breathed it in like a new beginning. That was the last time I saw either of them in person. The aftermath came in pieces over the following months. My mother was eventually discharged to a Medicaid nursing home in Macon, a place called Oak Grove Manor. A social worker called me once, a polite woman named M.S. Davis, asking if I could contribute to her care or provide a family history for the medical records. I politely said no to the financial contribution, but I gave the medical history I knew because I'm not a monster. I heard through a cousin, the only one who still talked to me, that my mother's room was shared with another woman, that the facility was understaffed and smelled of urine, and that she spent most of her days staring out the window at a parking lot. She called me a few times from the facility phone, leaving voicemails that alternated between begging for forgiveness and screaming that I was a monster. I deleted them without listening after the first one. The cousin told me that Derek had been arrested for possession with intent to distribute, a small-time pill operation he ran out of a motel room, and he was serving a 2-year sentence in Georgia State Prison. When he got out, he had no one, and he ended up drifting down to Florida, doing odd jobs and sleeping in shelters. I didn't feel joy in their suffering. I felt a quiet relief, like a book closing, the end paper smooth and final. The Ramirez family is still in the house. I visit them sometimes for cookouts on the back deck I had rebuilt, and the kids call me Aunt Sarah. Maria sends me photos of the garden they've planted, rows of tomatoes and peppers where Nana's roses used to be, and it makes me smile. The magnolia is thriving, its trunk scarred but strong. Mrs. Harrington passed away in the spring of 2024, peacefully in her sleep at the age of 78. I had visited her the week before, and she'd held my hand and said, You did good, baby. You broke the chain. I spoke at her funeral, a small service at her church, the pews filled with former students, shelter volunteers, and friends. I cried harder than I had at Nana's. I paid off the loan to her estate, every cent, with a letter of thanks to her 2 sons, who I'd never met but who thanked me for loving their mother. I named a scholarship after her at the local community college, the Beatrice Harrington Scholarship for Single Mothers Pursuing Education. I used the rest of the house's rental income, after taxes and insurance, to start a small nonprofit that helps women veterans avoid homelessness. It's called Bridge Home, and we partner with shelters to provide job training and housing assistance. I'm not married, but I have a great dog, a rescue mutt named Gus, a brown and white pit mix who follows me everywhere, and a circle of friends who know my story and don't flinch. I drive a used Honda Civic, the same one with 220,000 miles, and I'm content. I don't talk to my family. I don't need to. Now, because this story is the kind that people love to debate, I can already hear the comments. So let's get into the Reddit-style edit part. Edit. A lot of you are asking why I didn't let my mother move in since she was sick. To me, forgiveness and enabling are different things. I forgave her for myself, so I could move on and not be eaten by bitterness. That forgiveness was a private act, a letting go of a hot coal I'd been holding. But letting her into that house would have meant displacing a vulnerable family and subjecting myself to her toxicity again. She would have turned my life upside down, demanded I be her full-time caregiver, and likely let Derek move in to cause chaos. The Ramirez children didn't deserve to lose their home because my mother decided to spend a decade ruining mine. Boundaries are not cruelty. They are self-respect. Edit 2. Several people want to know if I ever considered giving them some money or paying for a better nursing home. Honestly, no. Every dollar I have now I built through my own labor, after she took my inheritance and drained it. Giving her money would have felt like rewarding the person who set my life on fire. The state provides a safety net, and she used it. That's more than she ever gave me. I don't say that with anger anymore, just with a clear, settled conviction. Edit 3. Yes, I know the power of attorney was legally questionable. I've had lawyers look at it since. It turned out she used a disbarred attorney's template, a man named Gerald Franks who'd lost his license for fraud in 2014. The document was full of errors, but by then the statute of limitations had run out for a civil claim, and the criminal bar was too high because she was my mother and I'd signed willingly, even if under duress. I reported her to the state bar, but they couldn't do much since the attorney was already disbarred for unrelated reasons. The legal system failed me, but I had to make peace with it, or I'd still be bitter and broke. Edit 4. Some of you are furious at Derek and want him to suffer more. I get that. He was a product of my mother's toxic parenting, raised without boundaries and with a sense of entitlement that was staggering. But he also made his own choices as an adult, to steal, to use, to leech. I don't wish him harm. I just wish him far away from me. Prison is his rock bottom, and maybe he'll find a turning point too, like I did. I doubt it, but it's no longer my concern. Edit 5. Why didn't I confront them sooner? Why wait until she had a stroke? I didn't plan the timing. They came to me when they ran out of options, when the last safety net had snapped. The house was already restored and occupied when they reached out. I would have never sought them out to gloat, because that's not the kind of person I want to be. Revenge is best served by living well, not by hunting people down. The fact that they came to me was the universe's timing, not mine. I wasn't waiting for them to fall. I was busy building my own life. Edit 6. This is the one that will get people arguing. Some of you say I should have let the house go to a stranger at auction and never looked back because buying it again ties me to the past. I disagree. That house was my grandmother's dream for me. Reclaiming it, not as my home but as a sanctuary for someone else, completed a cycle. It wasn't about the asset. It was about reclaiming my narrative. Standing on those courthouse steps, holding that cashier's check, was the moment I took back what my mother stole. Not the house, but my power. And yes, it gave me the power to look my mother in the eye and show her what she lost. Some call that cold. I call it poetic. Now, the big question I always end these with. What would you have done? If you were in my shoes, with a mother who stole everything and a brother who never lifted a finger for you, and you had rebuilt from nothing to have a beautiful home filled with a deserving family, would you have opened your door when she was disabled and desperate? Or would you have kept walking? Drop your answer in the comments. I read every single one, and I'm genuinely curious where the line is between mercy and self-preservation. Because at the end of the day, that house isn't just a house. It's a monument to the fact that sometimes the best revenge is building something so good that the people who hurt you can't touch it, and watching them realize they're not even a part of the story anymore.